The morning sun cast long shadows across Central Park as Thomas Mitchell sat on his usual bench, counting the coins in his weathered palm. 73 cents. After sleeping rough for 8 months since losing his job and apartment, those coins represented everything he owned in the world. At 52, Thomas had been a software engineer for 15 years before the company downsizing left him scrambling to find work. Age discrimination in tech was real, and month after month of rejections had drained his savings, then his hope. Now, with his graying beard and worn clothes, most people looked right through him as if he were invisible. That's when he heard the crying. Across the path, near the playground, a small boy sat alone on a swing, tears streaming down his face. He couldn't have been more than 7 years old, wearing expensive-looking clothes that seemed oddly formal for a park visit, dark slacks, a button-down shirt, and shoes that probably cost more than Thomas spent on food in a month. But what Thomas didn't know was that this encounter would change both their lives in ways neither could imagine. Thomas looked around for the boy's parents, but the playground was nearly empty except for a jogger in the distance. The child's sobs grew louder, more desperate, and Thomas felt something stir in his chest that he hadn't felt in months, the urge to help someone else. He approached slowly, not wanting to frighten the boy. "Hey there, buddy," he said gently, keeping his distance. "You okay?" The boy looked up with red, puffy eyes. "I can't find my dad," he whispered. "We were supposed to meet here, but I got lost." Thomas glanced at his phone, an old model with a cracked screen that barely held a charge. It was 11:30 a.m. on a Tuesday. What was a young child doing alone in Central Park during school hours? "What's your name, son?" Thomas asked, settling down on a nearby bench. "Alex," the boy sniffled. "Alexander Chen Morrison." "That's a strong name," Thomas replied. "I'm Thomas." "How long have you been waiting here?" Alex wiped his nose with his sleeve. "Since yesterday. My dad said to wait here if we ever got separated, but he hasn't come." Thomas's heart broke at those words. "Since yesterday." "Alex, have you eaten anything today?" Thomas asked, his voice gentle but concerned. The boy shook his head. Thomas looked down at his 73 cents, then at the hot dog vendor across the park. He'd been planning to buy himself breakfast, his first meal in nearly 2 days. But looking at this scared, hungry child, the decision was immediate. "Come on," Thomas said, standing up. "Let's get you something to eat." They walked to the vendor together, Alex staying close to Thomas's side like a shadow. The vendor, a heavy-set man named Miguel, who'd seen Thomas around the park before, looked surprised when Thomas approached with the well-dressed child. "2 hot dogs, please," Thomas said, placing his coins on the counter. Miguel counted the money and shook his head. "This is only enough for one, amigo." Thomas felt his cheeks burn with embarrassment, but he nodded. "One, then. For the boy." But what happened next surprised them both. "Wait," Alex said, his small hand touching Thomas's arm. "We can share it." Miguel's expression softened as he watched the interaction. Without saying a word, he prepared 2 hot dogs and handed them over. "On the house today," he said quietly. As they sat on the bench eating, Alex began to open up. His father traveled constantly for work, something involving companies and computers. Alex explained in the simplified way children describe adult jobs they don't fully understand. His mother had died when he was 3, leaving just him and his father. "Dad always says if we get separated in the city, meet at this bench," Alex said, pointing to where Thomas usually slept. "He says it's his favorite spot because you can see the whole playground from here." Thomas felt a chill that had nothing to do with the October air. This child had been abandoned or lost and had spent a night alone in Central Park. In 2024, that seemed impossible. Yet here they were. Thomas made a decision that would haunt him for months to come. "Alex, we need to find your father or call the police," Thomas said gently. "You can't stay in the park alone." Alex's eyes filled with tears again. "But what if Dad comes back and I'm not here? What if he can't find me?" Thomas pulled out his old phone. "We'll leave a note. And I'll give you my phone number. If your dad comes here, he can call me." They spent the afternoon together. Thomas taught Alex how to skip stones in the pond, showed him which trees had the best climbing branches, and shared stories of his own childhood. For those few hours, Thomas forgot about his empty stomach, his uncertain future, his daily struggle for survival. As evening approached, Alex grew more anxious. "He should be here by now," the boy said, his voice small and worried. Thomas couldn't take it anymore. "Alex, I think we need to call someone, the police or child services or dash dash." "No!" Alex cried. "They'll take me away." "Dad says the system is broken, that they don't understand our family." Just then, Thomas's phone rang. The caller ID showed an unknown number. Thomas hesitated, then answered. "Hello? Is this Thomas Mitchell?" The voice was crisp, authoritative, with a slight accent Thomas couldn't place. "Yes, who is this?" "My name is David Chen Morrison. I believe you have my son." Thomas felt his world shift. "Are you Alex's father?" "Yes. Is he safe?" Thomas looked at Alex, who had grabbed his arm upon hearing his father's name. "He's safe. He's been waiting for you since yesterday." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Yesterday? Oh God, I've been searching everywhere. There was a family emergency in Seoul. I had to leave suddenly, and my assistant was supposed to arrange for Alex's care, but there was a miscommunication." The relief in the man's voice was palpable, and Thomas felt some of his suspicion fade. "Where are you?" David asked. "Central Park, the bench near the playground." "I'll be there in 20 minutes. 23 minutes later, a black sedan pulled up to the park entrance. A man in an expensive suit emerged, moving quickly but trying not to run. He was Asian American, probably in his early 40s, with the kind of confident bearing that suggested he was used to having his problems solved quickly and efficiently. "Alex!" he called out. "Dad!" Alex ran toward him, and Thomas watched as the man dropped to his knees and gathered his son into a fierce hug. Thomas stood awkwardly to the side, suddenly conscious of his appearance, the torn jacket, the days without a proper shower, the general air of a man living on the streets. He started to step back, to give the family their privacy and fade back into invisibility. But David Chen Morrison looked directly at him. What he said next changed everything. "You're Thomas Mitchell," David said, approaching with Alex still clinging to his side. "You stayed with my son for 2 days." "Just since this morning," Thomas corrected. "But yes, I couldn't leave him alone." David studied Thomas's face with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. "My son tells me you bought him food with your last dollar." Thomas felt heat rise to his cheeks. It wasn't much, just a hot dog. "And you gave him your phone number, stayed with him when he was scared, played with him, made him feel safe when his father failed him." The words hung in the air between them. Thomas didn't know how to respond. David reached into his jacket and pulled out his wallet. "Please let me reimburse you and pay you for your time watching Alex." Thomas held up his hand. "I don't want money." "Everyone wants money," David replied, his tone matter-of-fact rather than cynical. Thomas's response stopped David cold. "Not everyone," Thomas said quietly. "Some people just want to help a scared kid." David stared at him for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he did something unexpected. He sat down on Thomas's bench. "Alex told me you used to work with computers," David said. Thomas nodded. "Software engineering, before the layoffs." "What kind of software?" "Back-end systems mostly. Database architecture, server management, nothing glamorous." David was quiet for a moment, processing this information. "Thomas, can I ask you something personal?" Thomas shrugged. "Sure. How long have you been homeless?" The directness of the question should have offended Thomas, but something in David's tone suggested genuine interest rather than judgment. 8 months, Thomas replied. "Lost my job, couldn't find another one. Savings ran out, then the apartment. It happens faster than you'd think." David's next question revealed something Thomas couldn't have expected. "Would you be interested in a job?" Thomas let out a bitter laugh. "Doing what?" "I've applied to hundreds of positions. Nobody wants to hire a 52-year-old engineer who's been out of work for 8 months. "I do," David said simply. Thomas looked at him suspiciously. "Doing what exactly?" David smiled for the first time since arriving. Thomas, I should probably mention something. My company is Morrison Chen Technologies. Maybe you've heard of it? Thomas's mouth fell open. Morrison Chen Technologies was one of the largest cloud computing companies in the world, with a valuation in the billions. Their platforms powered half the internet. You're David Chen Morrison? The David Chen Morrison. I prefer Alex's dad, David replied. But yes, that's me. The revelation hit Thomas like a physical blow. He had spent 2 days with the son of one of the most powerful tech executives in the world, and he'd treated the boy exactly the same way he would have treated any lost child. No special consideration, no attempt to leverage the connection, no calculation about what it might mean for his future. Just human kindness. Thomas, David continued, I've been thinking about expanding our social impact initiatives. Corporate responsibility projects, community outreach, programs that actually make a difference instead of just looking good on annual reports. Thomas nodded, not sure where this was heading. The problem is, most people in my world don't understand what it's like to actually need help. They understand poverty as a concept, homelessness as a statistic, unemployment as an economic indicator, but they've never lived it. David gestured around the park. You've lived it. You understand what people actually need, what actually works, what's just well-intentioned nonsense from people who've never missed a meal. Thomas began to understand what David was offering. You want me to help design social programs? I want you to run them, David said. Director of Community Impact, 6-figure salary, full benefits, equity package, based here in New York, but with resources to do real work. Thomas felt dizzy. I don't understand. Why me? David looked at Alex, who was now playing on the nearby swings within earshot, but giving the adults space to talk. Yesterday, I failed my son in one of the most basic ways possible. I left him vulnerable and alone because I got caught up in business crisis management and forgot what actually mattered. His voice grew softer. But a stranger, a man who had every reason to worry about his own survival first, saw my child in distress and chose to help. Not because he expected something in return, not because he knew who Alex was or who I am, but because it was the right thing to do. David's next words would stay with Thomas for the rest of his life. Thomas, I've built a multi-billion-dollar company by identifying talent and character. I can spot both from a mile away. What you did for Alex, staying with him, feeding him, keeping him safe, making him feel valued, that wasn't charity. That was leadership. Thomas felt tears pricking his eyes. I just couldn't leave him alone. Exactly. That's why you're the right person for this job. Because you don't walk away when someone needs help, even when helping them costs you something you can't afford to lose. David stood up and extended his hand. So what do you say? Want to help me build something that actually matters? 3 months later, Thomas stood in his new office on the 47th floor of the Morrison Chen building. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, he could see Central Park spread out below, including the bench where his life had changed. His first program, the Emergency Family Assistance Network, was already operational in 5 cities, providing immediate support for families facing temporary crises, job loss, medical emergencies, housing instability. The program was built on a simple principle. Sometimes people just need help. No strings attached, no judgment, no bureaucratic obstacles. Just human beings helping other human beings. Alex visited the office regularly after school, having appointed himself as Thomas's unofficial advisory board member. Today, he was reviewing applications from families requesting assistance. This family needs help with rent because the dad got sick, Alex said, pointing to a file. We should help them. What makes you say that? Thomas asked, genuinely curious about the 7-year-old's reasoning. Because when people are scared about their home, they can't think about anything else. Like I was scared in the park until you helped me. Thomas smiled, realizing that Alex understood the program's mission better than most adults. The first year's results exceeded everyone's expectations. The Emergency Family Assistance Network had helped over 10,000 families, with an 87% success rate in helping people stabilize their situations long-term. More importantly, The program had been replicated by 6 other major corporations. David had been right. Thomas's experience with homelessness and unemployment gave him insights that traditional social workers and program designers couldn't replicate. He understood the dignity issues, the practical barriers, the psychological impact of asking for help. But the program's success wasn't just about Thomas's background. It was about the principle that had guided him that morning in Central Park. Sometimes, helping someone else is the most important thing you can do, regardless of your own circumstances. On the 1-year anniversary of their first meeting, Thomas and Alex returned to the park. They sat on the same bench where Thomas had spent so many nights, where Alex had waited for his father, where 2 strangers had become family. "Do you ever think about that day?" Alex asked, now 8 and more thoughtful than most children his age. "Every day," Thomas replied honestly. "Do you think Dad would have found me if you hadn't helped?" Thomas considered this. "I think your dad would have found you eventually. He's a pretty determined guy." Alex nodded. "But it would have been scarier without you." "Yeah," Thomas agreed. "It would have been scarier." They sat in comfortable silence, watching families play in the same playground where they'd first met. A young mother pushed her toddler on the swings. An elderly man fed pigeons from a park bench. Joggers ran past, focused on their own goals. Life continuing, ordinary and extraordinary at the same time. "Thomas," Alex said. "Yeah, buddy?" "Thanks for not walking away." Thomas felt the familiar tightness in his throat that came whenever Alex said something that cut straight to the heart of things. "Thanks for giving me a reason to stay," he replied. As they walked back toward the park entrance where David was waiting to drive them home for dinner, Thomas reflected on the strange chain of events that had brought them together. A missed communication, a scared child, 73 cents, and a decision to share. Such small things, such enormous consequences. Sometimes the most important moments of our lives begin with the simplest choice, to see someone who needs help and decide to help them, regardless of what we might gain or lose in the process. Thomas had learned that kindness isn't just about the person you're helping. It's about who you choose to be in the moment when someone else needs you. And sometimes that choice changes everything, not just for them, but for you too. The last dollar he'd shared had come back to him multiplied beyond anything he could have imagined. But more than that, it had returned to him as purpose, family, and the knowledge that even in his darkest moment, he had chosen to be the kind of person who helps a crying child. That choice had made all the difference.